Okay, everyone back. So we're going to talk about data-driven marketing, an important topic, as we've heard this morning. So we're going to start by introducing the panelists. Are going to introduce themselves and tell us how they decide which is the best kind of data to use for a specific campaign.
Yes, so hi, my name is Matthias. So basically I run an e-commerce store for selling shoes online in Switzerland, and we have 15 stores across the countries. So what kind of data do we use in our email marketing? We try to use all the data we have about the customer, and the challenge is basically for us is to be able to collect those data in all the different systems you have. You know, we have stores, you have their own systems, you have the cashier machine, you have their own systems, you have email marketing in its own that generates data in a system, and then you have the e-commerce website with its own data in its own system. So for us, the tricky part is there's a lot of raw data here, and is how do you use that data and bring it together in the email marketing?
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm looking after email and SMS channels for British Gas. In regards to data and how we use data, we don't really decide on what we use. I'm actually quite glad that previous panel spoke about customer centricity, because what we do, we create email programs, we don't create campaigns, so we don't really select the data. Data is there, and it's being kind of decided by a customer and customer's behavior on what is being used at that point. So we use as Matthias said, we use quite a lot of data, but what goes in the email is decided by a customer.
I'm Dela. I'm CEO of AlchemyWorx. We're an agency that helps people with their email marketing. Data is kind of a really weird thing. I've always been into it. I can't explain it. I was crap at maths at school. I wasn't very good. I think it's because I had a bad teacher, but that's me saying it. But I see numbers. You know, if you show me a number, I'll go, that number cannot be right. And someone will go, it's in the spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet's right. And I say, no, it's impossible for this to happen in that way. I go beyond the number and think about how that would come about. And it's kind of both a blessing and a curse, because I'm looking in places where most people are not. So our challenges tend to mirror the challenges that you guys face, because you just bring them to me as a problem and we have to try and fix them. So getting the data from the silos, that's a challenge, right? Stitching it together, ownership, those are all things that are all big challenges that are brought to us. So what we've tended to do is start to try and think in a way and use data creatively in a way that gives us enough of an answer to free the budget to break down the silos that are faced. And so I think the biggest number you could ever use is revenue. It's the most important data point. At this stage, I'm actually not interested in attribution, because as soon as you bring attribution in, then you're bringing the war into the room, and I don't want to have that war. I just want to see what it is. So I just want to see the numbers. What days do you do well? What months did you do well? When do people spend money? And then I back from there to start then looking for what may have caused that. And I think that's the key difference in the way we approach it and the way most people in the industry. They look at the number and start trying to build up, whereas I'm doing the opposite. I'm sort of looking at what happened and then trying to dig down into seeing it. And top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, which I spoke about before, we're obsessed with bottom of the funnel because that's the most measurable, right? It's the stick that we get beaten with most. And we keep giving that stick and making bigger and bigger of those sticks to the people to beat us, and they keep beating us, and we go, why? I'm delivering the numbers. And they go, because no one cares about the small number. They only care about the big number. So that's really my approach is look at the big number. The big number is the revenue. It's important to the entire business. It's the best way to start top-down looking into it to free the budget that will help me help you. That's kind of where it is.
Mm-hmm. So when you guys are starting to put together your campaigns or your programs and you're defining your objectives, do you define the objectives first, or are you looking at the data first? Are you looking and seeing like, oh, we're not making our sales numbers, and this is the data that's driving the objectives, or do you define the objectives, we want to increase sales, and then dive in and look at the data?
So we start with hypothesis. Everything starts with hypothesis at British Gas. Then you look into data, and that will be the second step. So the proper data analysis and insight is very important to drive anything. So that's the start and end point as well. So after running a certain program for a certain amount of time, you end it with the analysis that gives you some learnings to drive future email campaigns and programs.
And what, there's so many different kinds of data points. There's browsing behavior, past purchase, demographics, predictive. How do you determine which data to use?
I think it's at some point it's the marketing intelligence that comes on the table. You've talked about objectives, and we've talked about results. Basically, results for us is revenue, but also traffic. Traffic is also important. And then you have
traffic to the site or traffic to
traffic
stores.
to the site or traffic to the stores, of course. And it's all about, it's coming back to the objective. Do you define the objective first, or can you continue to compute or calculate the objective? It's about learning. It's about learning and testing. And the more you learn, the better you are at predicting a result and therefore setting an objective right, I think. And that's the challenge for the marketing team. And the beauty with email marketing is that you can basically add new campaigns. It's just about how much effort you're ready to put on the table.
You're nodding your head, Dan.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Yes, I agree. And in regards to use of data, from the experience, the closer you get to the real time, the better. Old data, quite important. In our case, British Gas, ending contract, this is where we contact customers. But throughout the life cycle, the customer's behavior, what they do online, how do they interact with emails, this is the most powerful piece of data that we have at the moment. Yeah.
I'm sort of between two questions. They're sort of related. So I'll start by saying I try and go for observation first. So the challenge with setting up a hypothesis as your start, or trying to define the strategy and then looking for the data, is bias. You're immediately injecting your bias into the hypothesis. So let me give you an example. How many people here set up a hypothesis and then decide to look for data and test it that they know is going to fail? Anybody? Why? There you go. Oh no, when do you do that? Fantastic, but that's one person. The only other time I've heard someone say yes and say when my boss said it, and I think it's a shit idea, thank you. So I test it just to prove that idiot wrong, right? That's kind of, that's kind of what people try and do. So I tend to sort of look for phenomena, right? I look for delta all the time. Why did that change? Up, down, left, right, don't really care. Why did that change? And then once I spot the delta, then maybe I'll start diving into hypotheses about why that might be the case, et cetera, because then you're not putting your bias in. Does that make sense? Maybe actually what you found out, that something you did created a shift that if I had told you that you did by mistake, right? Someone sent the wrong email out and it just blew the numbers off. And then, yeah, that's what I mean. And so that's why I'm just looking for a delta. So my recommendation to everyone is look at all data, track it regularly, because deltas are impossible to spot if you just look at a spreadsheet with a year's worth of data and you're trying to go in there to try and understand a year's worth of data and say, oh, that changed on that day. So every day, I think you should look at your key KPIs and just look at the number. Oh, that's up a bit. Oh, normally, and just have the sense of what's normal and what's normal. As soon as you spot something abnormal, then start diving in, and the answers can be really insightful.
Matthias, we were talking before about the using predictive data and weather and how that helps you determine what to send and helps increase your response rates.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that's maybe it's super obvious when we speak about this here. Imagine tomorrow it's snowing. People will rush on shoes for the winter or so on. But having this in email campaigns automated is a different story. And actually, this means basically for us is getting access to data that is not in your database. Weather data, weather forecast data, is a data set that you can buy or get from other providers. And there's many other data sets like this for your own business that's really important, that matters, had a direct effect on your business that you should really get on and have in your campaigns so you can automate this kind of stuff. And I think this is this helps us not only better understand our business, but also try new hypotheses and things that we can work on that we didn't do before.
I think weather is quite interesting one, actually. So at British Gas, you know, this type of weather, when it's really cold, actually we've noticed, and when it rains, and it rains almost every day in the UK during the winter, we've noticed actually that...
it's not true. It's sunny.
Maybe it is today. But what I want to say, we've noticed that customers actually are responding better to our emails when it's cold. You know, when it's cold and miserable outside, customers open and click. When I work in retail, when the heat wave was coming, we actually were losing about £300,000 in revenue a day with the 1 degree centigrade app, right? So 1 degree centigrade made that £300,000 revenue loss. You know, and it was quite interesting. So this is when we had to actually increase email activity or marketing activity in general, just to close that gap a little bit. So it's, again, it's the data that you don't really have or you don't use as such, but it kind of drives the activity and the behaviors.
And I would add on this that it's a challenge basically to identify this data. Maybe weather data is obvious, but there's tons of other data that is really a challenge to identify. And I think I'm happy that today there is lots of machine learning stuff coming out, intelligence, artificial intelligence and so on. And there are tools that are coming out that you can play on your data that helps you for this. But I think we're just at the beginning.
Are you, how are you determining like which data is important and not going down the wrong avenue of data that doesn't really matter and isn't going to help drive that? Is that what you're talking about, Dela? The things that are standing out, like this is different, so this does matter?
Yes. I have panels. We don't normally put charts up there, but I tweeted a chart that if anyone wants to, at Quist, go and have a look and you'll see the chart. And really it's showing all the things that happen from an email without an opener and a click, okay? So we're looking in a very linear way. Did we send the email, yes or no? And if we sent it, did they open it, yes or no? And if they opened it, did they click, yes or no? And if they clicked, what happened next? Did they visit the website, yes or no? And that's about it. It's a very linear thought. But Kath mentioned earlier today, all the studies say that what's more important, deferred. I might open it later. When is later? A day, a week, 3 months? I've seen people go back and open a 9 or 11-month-old email to buy a specific product that was in an 11-month-old email. Who's attributing for that? Probably not. So where I'm coming from is saying that we all know intrinsically, right? So we all know that when the weather's good, you don't sit in front of your computer. That's been made a bit better because we take our computer onto the beach with us, and so now we're in the sun, nearly naked, but we've got the internet in front of us and we're interacting with our email, right? That couldn't happen. You wouldn't take your desktop to the beach. That's one of the reasons why that was going on. So I'm going back to it. I'm still trying to say there are lots and lots of things going on. We know about them, but we're not testing for them and we're not optimizing for them. And consider this. I don't think anybody achieves on average an open rate, or is 8 out of every 10 emails you send won't get opened, right? Every one of those, the subject line is the message, okay? But it didn't generate that interaction that makes us start behaving, okay? So it's like, oh, nothing happened. So we don't look for it. But actually, the message and the medium are the same thing, and it's the subject line. So if your subject line said, great deals in store today, you should be looking at your store data, right? Because the subject line said, great deals in store today. But we probably won't. We just look at the open rate and say, oh, that was a shit open rate. It was a shit open rate because they didn't have to open the email. They just went to the store.
Matthias, you're nodding your head. Do you guys see this.
Yeah, and we have a typical different behavior. We have different brands for what we're doing in e-commerce and what we're doing in-store plus e-commerce, because we have completely different type of customers. And the customers that we typically want to push to the stores have a complete different behavior with email. And we have some situations like really bad open rates, but you know, sales start today in the title, and then the huge frequency in stores with people showing the email to the store manager. So we see this experience, we learn from that. What we're learning is the title is really important there. It's really important beyond the whole message that follows. Yeah.
So how do you look at this data? Then do you kind of look at it holistically and understand that?
Holistically, we're missing part of the data that's happening in the stores. Well, you have some kind of traffic counters, you have a lot of things. You have Google coming out now that is able to identify people that visited your stores. There's stuff like this coming, but it's still very poor. And the customer is also reluctant to give you too much data. I know a retail store that's tested in some kind of a billboard. They said, hey, today we're measuring with your Wi-Fi of your cell phone how many people are entering the store and so on, and people get upset. So it's really tricky how you play with this data. You have to inform people. It's a bit tricky. It's really sensitive when you're coming to data in the store with the customer. You need to explain them what you're doing, and you need to give them the opportunity to opt out of that.
And Dan, you don't have stores, so what is your take on broadcasting through the subject line? Is this something that matters to your customers that you're looking at?
Yeah, so in utilities, it's not as exciting topic as retail or fashion is, right? So what we've done, it was quite interesting to me what we've tested recently. I mentioned it earlier today when we were talking. Retesting things that you've tested in the past, and kind of you found out that things don't work really. They will work on one day. So in this example, being in retail, I've tested personalization of subject line with first name, didn't really work, or there was no impact on open rate, and if there was a negative one actually. But now in utilities, personalization of subject line works really, really well. And on some of the campaigns, we don't, of course, if you start using it, you abuse it, and it will stop working, right? So what we carefully select campaigns or email programs that we apply personalization of subject line to, and in some of them, through A/B tests, we noticed even 100% improvement in open rate. So quite significant, I would say.
But then that's amazing. What do you set your benchmarks against after you've had 100% open rates?
Pardon, could you?
How do you benchmark against that when you've had such a spike? You don't expect another 100%.
No, you don't. And it's not only about personalizing it with a first name. So you try. So you go beyond the first name. You might mention a postcode, or you might mention a town they live in or city. So it's just trying different types of personalization all the time. Tone of voice. It doesn't really matter for us, because again, we don't sell things. It's difficult to say, oh, the boiler sale ends tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Who is going to spend thousands of pounds because it ends tomorrow? It's quite difficult. So for us, we just play with what we have and what we can do, and we've noticed length of the subject line, keeping them short plays a very, very important role. So keeping them short, personalized, it what works for us. And in regards to improving, you just try new things, every time you test, and you A/B test. We A/B test everything with every email program actually. So.
I wanted to add to that, because the conversation we had was quite interesting. So 2 things Dan said to me this morning. So first of all, he tried it before and it didn't work. And so a lot of people go, it doesn't work, right? So he moved company. He had a bias in his head. Does that make sense? And a lot of people would have allowed that bias to just continue, right? And he overcame bias and tried something different. So I think the moral in that story is you have to keep testing things even when you think you've done them before, and that's an important thing. The other thing that I found about that, and this was about the length of the subject line and how long or how short, keeping it short. We're a funny group of people, right? So we spend all our time talking about responding to our customers' behavior, right? Who here disagrees that responding to your customers' behavior is a good thing to do? I mean, does anyone disagree with that statement? Okay. Have you ever thought that their behavior was driven by you in the first place? So you do something, they respond, then you spend all your time trying to understand what made them respond to the response that you made happen in the first place. I know it sounds complicated. It's really quite simple. Let's take, hands up, who wants to give me a sense? What's a short subject line? How many characters is short for subject line? Anyone want to hazard a guess? 3 letters. 35. See, the most common answer you get is 35. Short, I agree. Short to me is 1 character. 3 characters. How about long? How long is a long subject line? There you go. I don't call it long until it's about 150. That's long. Okay? So we have a world that thinks long is 35, short is 35, long is 65. Okay? They're trying really hard. If they go long, it's about 65, and if they go short, it's about 35. So 70% of all subject lines are between 35 and 70 characters long. Okay? And when you look at all subject lines, anyone who puts oh my god or oops or whatever, the reason it is it stands out because almost everybody is in 35 to 65. So now we're spending a lot of time calculating how we measure the KPIs on subject line length because our definition of short is 35 and our definition of long is 65. We don't look either way and we're missing the whole picture. If you go between 35 and 65 characters, on average, you will get below average response for most people simply because it happens all the time. There's nothing new. And the other thing that we do is we'll run a test and we will attribute the success to our cleverness and not just the fact that it was new. So, oh, I'm really clever. I did this.
It's clever to try always new stuff, right? So.
That's the only clever thing. So we talk all the time, and this is about the data and everything else. We spend all our time talking about telling a story, the customer journey, and everything else. But all our KPIs and all our thinking is on the next email. What's the open rate? What's the click rate? We're not thinking of the holistic story. We're not thinking of, okay, over a year, how many opens is good, how many opens is bad. Does that make sense? And it could be for your brand, 10 opens a year is great. You're sending 150. And so you should be happy with an open rate of 15 or 10% and don't even bother trying to change that because of that. And it's separating what we're doing to our audience from what the audience is telling us, I think is the biggest challenge within the data and how we look at it.
And so how do you define those metrics that say 10 opens? Is it just like looking at the data, doing the testing, doing the homework, and then establishing, okay, this was good for us because we saw the boost in incremental sales, we saw the drivers?
So 2 things. Let's assume you haven't been looking at your data every day, right? And let's assume you're starting. You go, oh, I saw this panel, and I really, really want to work on introducing KPIs and data, and let's assume you wanted to do that. As I say, the first thing you do is look for big changes, right? And then start your work around the big changes. The other thing I would do is start with really, really simple and improve. And there's a tendency not to start until you've got a really, really complicated thing that you're going to test that's going to tell you something really obscure that doesn't move the needle. And my other challenge is that whenever you get a lift that's ridiculous, 20%, 50%, 100%, 395% increase in ROI, that's not sustainable, otherwise we'd all be billionaires, right? What really matters is the small changes to the big number all the time, and the only way you can do that is focus on big events. So go, oh, right, so our big time is summer, okay? Lots of people do that. Our worst time is winter, so we're going to scale down our activity in winter, and we're going to up our activity in summer, when maybe you should be thinking about doing the opposite. So those are the kinds of things that you would do, because you're just saying, oh, what could we do to have a better number in November? And maybe that's more important. So doubling your sales in November might be easier and give you more money than maybe a smaller shift in your better months. And vice versa. But you have to look for it.
Are either of you guys doing this?
So this is exactly what we've changed at British Gas, and the curve is actually opposite. So we don't do much activity, or we weren't doing much activity during winter months because there was no point. Customers are not using heating, right? So the boilers is not going to break down. So there is no reason to sell them home insurance or boiler insurance in that regard. So this is what we've changed in the last couple of years. We've increased email activity during the summer period because of what you just said, because it's easy to do it during the winter because customers are responding. And as I said earlier today, when it's cold, customers are actually opening and clicking the Engage With brand. But it's a lot more difficult to do it throughout the summer time. So it's very challenging for us to do so, but you know what, we're relentlessly doing it. So it's the way forward, I'd say.
Can I just add to that really quickly? Because when does your boiler normally fail? When you fire it up for the first time. Okay? Now, at that point, it's the beginning of the winter, unless you were very smart like Matthias and you were collecting predictive weather, right? So you knew that was going to happen. Mostly, it's a surprise to all of us. Oh my God, it's suddenly cold. You go and turn on your boiler, it explodes. At that moment, they haven't heard from British Gas for 9 months because people don't open with their email. What you want people to do is pick your name first before you or anyone else and your competitors know they're in the market. And that's called branding, which is the top of the funnel thing. And to be prepared for winter, I would argue that you should be telling your boiler story in the summer, potentially, or building up that, and especially if you're buying media on TV and stuff, it's cheaper in the summer because everybody's on holiday and no one pays attention and blah, blah, blah. So you're actually getting a double whammy, in my view.
Yeah, I think it's about anticipation. I mean, if I would be at your place, maybe I would send an email in summer, hey, test your boiler. So also in terms of repairing, you can anticipate this. We've realized that we sell like shoes and fashion stuff. So you have this basically 2 seasons, winter and summer, and then you have sale, and again next season, and sale, and next season, and so on. What we realized in looking at the data is that some customers, and this is our best customer, basically, the one buying full price, all new in season, they're starting really early to inquire about the products. It's already sale from the last season, and we don't have yet the new products, but those guys are already here, they're already looking for information, and they don't like sale. So having this kind of information, those guys are completely in a different pattern. We have to talk to these people differently. That's some learnings we made really from the data.
Absolutely. So changing directions a little bit, how do you manage data and who owns it within your organization?
So basically, we manage it ourselves, and I've stressed the fact that we want to own the data on our own system. So the kind of master data is always sitting on our databases. For me, it's really important because the raw data is one thing, but you can deduct a lot of information from this raw data, and you can continue to enrich and learn from this data. If, in my opinion, you give that to a supplier, the risk is that you lose a bit of the control. I think working with your suppliers on how the data works and how you can access this data is the key to continue to learn from the data and to have it as a, let's say, a core activity in digging into the data.
So we manage it internally as well. So we've got actually quite a big data and insight team, and that team is divided into groups, and 2 main groups in that area: CVM, customer value management, and CRM teams. So CVM do all of the pre-campaign, pre-programs, sizing, analysis. They decide on, or they write algorithms on deciding who is the best for this product or for this campaign or this email. And we've got a CRM campaign that delivers the data and runs a post-campaign analysis for us.
So you guys don't come up with a lot of challenges in terms of wanting to get access to data that you...
Oh yeah, that's...
for your campaigns?
That's a different story.
Yes, it's a completely different story. It is challenging, and I guess it is challenging in every big company because there are too many different business functions wanting something from customer. And we discussed earlier today, I actually quite like that fact that there is a gatekeeper in place, saying, you know what, we can't go more than X times to this customer per month, per week, per year, whatever it is. So I quite like that fact that, you know, there's a guardian saying, you know what, that's it, it's enough. We've used that customer you know, many times this year, and we're not going to use him anymore. So, or we've done certain programs or campaigns, or we've run something, and we're not going to do it again. Again, utilities. It's not retail. It's not fashion. You know. So we have to be very, very careful, because life cycle plays a very, very important role. You know, in our case.
So how often are you guys emailing? And I'm curious the difference between you two, Matthias and Dan.
As much as we can. Okay. No, seriously, as much as you humanly can. But I'm not about keeping or protecting the customer, about setting a cap. We still put a cap in some way at a customer at one email a day, or at least one advertising email, because it makes kind of human sense. I could even do more. We spoke about data, about how sensitive it is to collect data, but what customers like is that we share data to them. You've seen that maybe with some whatever accounts you have, when you can have the look at what time you spent in the stores, how much time you spent in the store, how many shoes you bought with us, and so on. This kind of gamification data works really well. And this is kind of it's a free message to customer. Hey, look, that's funny. And this is one email on top that just adds some kind of brand value. It don't look at this as a conversion metrics or so on. But it's an additional email we can make. It doesn't disturb. So as long as you're original, creative, and you kind of add some kind of value, you can still add and add and add.
Mm-hmm.
As in, do be smart. So from our agency perspective, I don't think the problem is who owns the data or where it sits, right? It's whether you can access it or not. That's the challenge. So as an agency, we kind of expect, and GDPR is going to make this more rather than less, anything that around PII or data that's sensitive or personal, most people want it on site. And to be honest, as an agency or someone who has tools that helps people to do analytics, I don't want to be responsible for your PII either. So working with it on site for PII, that's fine. Off-site campaign data, you can do quite a lot, and being clever about how you get understandings without having to know who. So there's plenty you can learn without knowing who, and there's plenty of things you can do without knowing exactly who did what. The key, and this is the problem that we found with our clients, that we could only fix by developing tools to do that, is here's the process. It doesn't matter where your data sits, right? You go, oh, I've got a really good idea. Let's go and see or test that, right? So you go to the team and say, okay, I want to test this, so I need this data. And they go, okay, write me a brief, okay? And it has to be a good brief. If you write a bad brief, they'll wait 3 weeks and then send it back to you and say, oh, we didn't do it because the brief wasn't good enough, right? Isn't that what typically happens? So you then write it, and they bring you the data, and you go, oh, that's so exciting. But look, this showed me something I hadn't seen before, and you go, I now need to know that. And they go, can you send me a brief? It's going to go to the back of the line, and in 3 weeks' time, you're now going to get the data that will allow you to make this clever decision. So the big problem isn't who owns the data, where it sits, or who controls it, is whether you can, in a timely way, ask a question and get an answer in minutes, ideally, hours at the worst. If it's more than one day, then you're kind of trying to do your job with like one of your legs cut off. It's just a very difficult thing to do. So kind of that's what we did. We had to fix the access to the data, and the only way to do that was to work with clients to keep the data where it was, pre-digest it so that you have a bit that's up on top that you, the marketer, can interrogate without having to go through the entire database, run a script, wait 3 weeks for the answer, and then do the same thing again. And that's the challenge. So I see it as access and not ownership or control is the channel, is the challenge.
To add on that, I think with access, the key is also real-time access, because it's sometimes easy to say, hey, you have access to my data, I just download the CSV, and oh my God, I have to download it and then upload it in another system and so on. But the real-time access, and we're just, I think, starting to get tools today that are this real-time data access across 3 different data sets. I think that's the big part.
And it's very doable, but as I say, it doesn't happen automatically internally. And when I said access to data, I wouldn't say real time, because real time means that I kind of know what someone did a minute ago within a minute. I'm talking about being able to interrogate, let's say, up to yesterday's data and get an answer in 2 minutes. Now, that is so close to real time for me that I'm happy with that.
Mm-hmm. Dela, you touched on it. My next question is, what are you guys doing to prepare for GDPR? Matthias?
Well, I share Amir's pain. To be honest, we haven't done enough, unfortunately, but what we're doing, one of the things, it's not going to help. So what we're doing, we're in progress of preparing a preference center that is actually channel specific. So that will allow us to kind of opt in customers to a specific channels, and as well as doing everything that is needed to be done to be in line with all of the new rules. We are looking for grey areas as well. And everyone does, and you know what, they say, there's strict rules, you need to follow them, but there is always a little bit of room within the grey area that you can use.
So I'm a bit specific here because I'm not in the European Union. I'm from Switzerland, but still I have to. But
you market to people in France.
I still have to completely comply to GDPR because GDPR means that you touch European citizen data or people living in the European Union. Guess what? We have stores at the border of Switzerland, so we have people, they're not European, they're Swiss, but they're living in Europe. They're concerned. We have European customer traveling to Switzerland as tourists, buying stuff. We have customer cards. We have data on them. So we're completely concerned by this GDPR, and it gives us also headaches. We're sure that we're not going to be the first company targeted by this, but we still want to comply. What we're doing, the first effort, is basically identify where there is personal data in our data sets. And I think the first thing now to do is pseudonymization, meaning that whatever data I have about my customer that are personal, I want to have the raw data pseudonymized. This is not your name, it's just some kind of a hash, right? So at least I can keep my data set as it is. I don't have to track whatever is happening there. I have tools that access this data, that gets the key, and that sees the customer name, and that's fine. That's the first step. And then the second step is really about documentation. You have to document basically everything that's happening with your data and also log every kind of access that can be on these data sets. So it's not that complicated at the bottom line, but still there's a lot of, for me the biggest part is the documentation effort, I think, of the process.
That's a very good point. Everyone's focus on GDPR has been on what I think is the easy bit, compliance. Oh, I'm compliant. I'm done. Read it. What's going to happen, and that's why what you're saying is absolutely right, is one word, transparency. That one word is going to potentially kill people in this room who don't document, don't archive, allow the data in the ESP to roll into archive after 90 days without having it. And by the way, to me, and this is really key to this discussion, the very data that you need to make smart decisions is the very data that you need to archive in order to be able to comply with the transparency part of GDPR. So for me, this panel is perfect because it's a wonderful, wonderful thing for me in the way I see things is everyone's going to be forced to put their data in a place in order to comply with transparency, which will allow us marketers to be even smarter in the future and all of that sort of stuff. The other thing about GDPR, which I think everyone should seriously consider if you haven't considered it already, is attribution models and how they impact your GDPR, right? If you're very, very strict about your attribution and you only attribute an email as being of value, or someone, if they don't open within 3 months, right, I'm going to stop mailing them, blah, blah, blah. At that very moment, you're removing your ability to mail them on legitimate interest, right? So if your attribution models are first click, last click within X number of days, trust me, that's going to have an impact on what the commissioner will decide is legitimate interest or not. Now, here's a different way of looking at legitimate interest for the sake of GDPR and email in particular. And you have to look at the data for this. People who are on my list and receive email from me regularly transact twice as often as people who I don't email at all. Okay? Legitimate interest, therefore, is removed from opens, and it's removed from inactivity, and it's removed from anything else. And it's allowing you to measure the broadcast aspect and, with legitimate interest, continue to do that. So if you haven't thought about your archiving, and if you haven't thought about keeping all the data so that when one disgruntled person goes, you tried to kill me with your marketing, you call it grey, I call it murder, prove to me that you didn't abuse the way you were holding my data, you have to go in and show that person what you did over time, right? Compliance fades into insignificance when you ask yourself, are you able to cost-effectively pull that information out and deliver it to somebody, either as an individual or show that as a group that couldn't have happened because they never fitted into any of the groups where X or Y or Z happens. So from a data perspective, try and get your company to focus on the archiving and the keeping of the data in an accessible place so that you can comply with transparency, and then fill your boots with using the data for really, really clever stuff. And that's what I like about the whole transparency piece, is it's actually giving us the very thing we were complaining that we tend to not have access to because it takes 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get the data and plus a team and blah, blah, blah. So I love GDPR in that sense. Compliance, that's for lawyers and accountants and data people. I don't care about that. You can't not do it. But what I do care about is, are you thinking beyond compliance into what that's going to mean to you in your day-to-day job? And if the answer is no, you're in trouble. Sorry.
We're going to be hearing more about GDPR the next session. So just, we're going to wrap it up here in a sec. So closing thoughts, what advice would you guys give to marketers here in the audience about how to better use their data? We'll go down the line quickly.
For me, it's very simple, is train the marketing people to be able to query the data, to be able to access the data, and being data sensitive.
I've got two, actually. The first one is just cleansing the data. You know, the data-driven marketing is as good as your data, and if you don't keep it clean, it's not going to perform. And the second one is just A/B test. What you've A/B tested before, just retest, right? If you think you're right because you've tested before, you're wrong. So keep testing.
I would say add C to A/B. That's all. Never test two variants. And the reason I say that is it's really surprising. Your chances of getting a lift if you only test two variants, a big lift, 20%, yeah? So your open rate, your click rate was 5, it's now 6. Okay, that's a biggish lift, and you'd be happy with that. Your chances of getting a 20% lift on an A/B test is 3%. ABC goes to 20%. And there's two reasons for that. One is you're adding another variable. Two, you actually are forced to think away from your safe comfort zone. I know this works, so I'm testing this against that, and I know that works. When you've got a third, you'll go, let me put some shit in there and see what happens. Okay? And when you start going to the end of the bell curve, that's when exciting things happen, both for bad and good. So yes, I agree, but I'd say always test 3 variables, never test 2, because the one other is a really easy thing to do. The other thing I would say is top down, right? Think of your big numbers first, okay? Don't think of ROI, or don't think of lift. If you get a 700% lift, I'll tell you now, you started with a number so small it's meaningless, okay? So I would much rather, so go for your big numbers, right? How do I improve this million people rather than those 20 people? Those 20 people will give me a lift of 700%, right? Those million people will give me a lift of 1%. I'm better off. And that's the only 2 pieces of advice I'd give you. Test 3, not 2, and start with a big number. And when you're completely done with your big numbers, spend the rest of your time at the bottom of the funnel. I don't really mind. But you'll never get there because the big numbers will actually take you further.
Okay, we have questions from the audience?
Here comes trouble.
Hi, I'm Florian from Emailing Network. I just want to ask you about what are some good tools for data analysis and data visualization that you are using in your activity?
Anybody? Oh, all of us. All of us.
So I've tested quite a lot of tools. I'm coming from a business analyst position 15 years ago. I've used the Cognos tools for those of you, cubes and stuff. It was really great tools, really expensive. I really loved it. I moved on to a position at eBay where basically they told me, hey, you have to do SQL queries. But then I realized the power of the raw data. And today what I'm trying to do is I have some really people that are able to query the data in a raw manner, and I have people that want to see dashboards. So what I try to find is a tool that accesses this data in the less biased way or the less summarized way and puts a dashboard at the end so that you can play with it. So there is plenty of tools in the market that do that. That's pretty recent. And they access the data real time, Dela, and not with a delay of 4 hours. So you get those Tableau tools, the really high ends, they're really expensive, and you have some entry-level tools. Both are really bringing you more value. It depends a lot on your budget then, yeah.
Yeah, so we use actually two. We've got Sidecut, Adobe Sidecut to analyze the online behaviors, and that's real time. And we use we've just implemented Pega, which is a great decisioning tool, CRM tool that gives us dashboards as well. Because to be honest, don't get me wrong, people love dashboards. They much prefer looking to anything that will generate dashboards is good. And to be honest, nothing will beat the good old Excel.
Yeah. So, I alluded to this before. The lack, in fact, one of the biggest failings of most of the marketing automation and email platforms out there is their analytics and reporting tools. They're inadequate at the very least, and completely useless would be a better way of describing most of them. If anyone says, ours is fantastic, you're the exception, not the rule, they're mostly crap. Partly because of archiving, they have to archive, otherwise they're carrying all this data, right? And it's really hard to do year on year if you're only using 90 days, for example. So we actually developed a tool, and it's basically a dashboard. And what it does is it's a combination of archive and dashboard. It pulls all the data out of the platform, archives it for you. But here's what it does that I think the Tableau and the Excel spreadsheet and everything else is that we've really thought of all the questions that you are going to ask. I mean, I've been doing this for 17 years. There is not a question that you could ask that hasn't been asked before. That's what I like about humanity, is it's just repetitive. It goes on, and we try and act as if it's new. So the problem you've got is with the Tableau thing, and we've had clients say, oh, I've got Tableau. And I say, okay, what happens when you want a new report? Oh, that's a week, because our Tableau guy is really, really busy. And, oh, you know what? That's on a real-time report. So your real-time is going to wait for a week while the Tableau guy writes a script that will give you more real-time information. So that's the first thing. So what's, I would say, the tool that we did and what's different about it is, one, it pulls it and it archives it. So you've got a double whammy. You've got the archive there so that you can look at your campaigns historically and you don't have to worry about the ESP side of it. But the second is we've pre-configured, pre-crunched the data. So you can ask any question that you might think about in the future because we pre-analyzed it without having to go back and rewrite it. So the clever piece is the algorithms that create that smaller piece, right? And we're constantly filling it. And that's where, if you like, most in-house tools fail, is because you need a specialist. And by the way, you can do it yourself, but again, that's not what you, that's a bad use of your time, right? You are very good. You can do it too. That's a bad use of your time, in my view. There are cheaper people and cheaper ways of getting that information. And so the answer for me is, we have a tool that does it, and I will, if anyone wants to know about it, I can talk about it later. I'm here as AlchemyWorx, which is the agency piece, and we had to develop the tool because it didn't exist.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.